morning, church. How are we doing today? Happy Easter to all of you. I'm going to ask you to right away to go ahead and open your Bibles to the book of Hebrews, chapter 2. It's great to see everybody. I lived in Chicago for 15 years, and on the south side of Chicago, Easter is a very big deal. And one of the things is that in Chicago, on the south side, it is a parade of hats in Chicago. And great, big, beautiful hats everywhere on Easter morning. And then also, it is the day that men feel the most confident to wear the color purple or pink or robin's egg blue. And so there's a lot of pastels going on. Rick's up here with his, which is great. Donnie right here, he's got his purple on. And so Easter is a celebration of new things. And I think one of the verses that I always think about when Easter comes about is in Hebrews chapter 2. And it's a verse that's actually quoting a psalm, but it's expounding upon it. And it says this in verse 5. It is not to angels that he has subjected the world to come, about which we are speaking. But there is a place where someone has testified, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? A son of man that you care for him. You made them a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor and put everything under their feet. And putting everything under them, God left nothing that is not subject to them. Yet at present, we do not see everything subject to them. But we do see Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. And the author's doing a couple things here. One of them is he's trying to testify to the preeminence of Christ over all creation and over all celestial hosts. But the other thing he's doing is that he is closing a loop that was begun. And in creation, you have to imagine, if you can, that there was a time where there was nothing. There was no creation. Not that there wasn't God. God always was. But there was a time before there was any physical reality. There was a different type of reality, but nothing that was made of matter, nothing that was made of mass. There was no color, there was no feeling. There was an emptiness. And then out of his own imagination, God created what we now see. Everything came from his mind. He spoke it into existence. And over that entire physical creation, he created mankind to be his stewards to rule over creation. That was the plan. And this is the other thing that the author is pointing to, is that there was this master design. And there was this great place for humanity, for men and women to have a role in creation that was meaningful, that was inspiring, that was huge. And then the author says, but we don't see that right now. That's not what we experience right now. And then he has this phrase, and this is the phrase, if there is a phrase that goes through my mind over and over again, it's this one. He goes, but we do see Jesus. So we don't see that reality, but we do see Jesus. And, it's debatable when the book of Hebrews was written, but it's written a few decades after the ascension of Jesus. So yes, Jesus has already died, and then he rose, and then he ascended. But the author is saying right now, as I write this, we may not see the world as it was designed. We may not see us fulfilling the role we were created to fulfill. But right now, we do see Jesus. And I have thought about that a lot. Like, what does he mean by that we see Jesus right now? I think one of the things he's saying is that we do not see that reality. We do see the reality of what Jesus made for us. And God is closing that loop. That design that has gone wrong. The design that was ruined by the introduction of death, the introduction of sin because of the trespasses of man. God is bridging that gap that was that was initiated by us. He is now bridging it with Jesus. Now, of course, that's a whole other sermon. But my point in bringing this verse is twofold, is that number one, Easter opens a path back to what we were created for. And secondly, the world right now is not the way it should be. I grew up in the Midwest. I moved around a lot as a kid, but I spent most of my time in the Midwest. And, as a child, we had, you had fire drills in school, and in the Midwest, you had tornado drills in school. And so when you would learn at the beginning of the day that there's going to be a tornado drill in third period. And then you would all, sometimes you'd go into the hallway or you'd go into the bathroom and you'd like, I don't know what this drill was supposed to protect us from. I think if a tornado rips the school open, the desk on top of you is not protecting you too much. But we would do these drills. And, there were several times in my life as a kid that we came into close contact with tornadoes. And I remember one especially, we were out playing during the day. And all of a sudden, the way that my parents called me in, because we kind of lived out in the woods, is they had a giant bell on the backyard. And they would ring that bell, and it was time for us to come home. Either that or my dad would whistle. And the whistle came after the bell. And if you came home with the bell, you were fine. But if Dad had to whistle, there was going to be trouble. And so we heard the bell. We started coming home. And as I was going home, I noticed that the sky was bright green. All right? And there was no wind at all. It was dead calm. There were no bird sounds. There were no insect sounds. The pressure had dropped so quickly that my ears hurt. My inner ear hurt a little bit. And then the tornado. We were in our house, and the tornado destroyed the homes behind us, somehow jumped our street, and then the path was in front of us. And the tornado sounds like a low train in the background, and then you just hear debris hitting the house, and you feel it shaking. But there is this dead calm. And in that calm, you just feel like something's off. Like something is wrong with the world right now. It's an interesting prescience that we sometimes have when things don't feel right, but we don't know why they don't feel right. Writers and thinkers, such as Nietzsche, would say that to attribute such feelings to some kind of ultimate truth is specious. Something that on the surface might seem to be true, but ultimately isn't. And yet, after thousands of arguments against and hundreds of years of institutional cynicism, humans still cannot help but wonder, is there something wrong with the world? Does this creeping suspicion of something more going on around me actually mean something greater? Is it more than just mere imagination, this feeling? Could it be that the wrongness we perceive from time to time is a portent of something that's actually true? Romans 8, verse 18 says this, "For I consider the sufferings of this present time, they are not worth comparing to the glory that is going to be revealed in us." All right? And so Paul right here is alluding to the same things that Hebrews chapter 2 was, okay? He goes, "For the creation eagerly waits with anticipation for God's sons to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in the hope that the creation itself will also be set free from this bondage to decay into the glorious freedom of God's children. For we know that the whole of creation has been groaning together with labor pains until now. Not only that, but we ourselves who have the Spirit as the first fruits, we also groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. Now in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is not hope. Because who hopes for what he sees? Now if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with patience." In this passage, Paul is alluding to a seen reality of decay, what we see in the world right now, versus an unseen reality of hope, something that we don't always see. We see the world around us. We see seasons changing from blossom to wilt. Old age takes everything away at some point. Disease sweeps away people. War, storms, and fire. Paul describes that creation itself, the very trees and mountains and stones and oceans outside of humanity, groan and strain against this seen reality as it hopes and waits for a hope that is yet to be seen. As I've said before, many academics and philosophers would call Paul's observations of creation and reality as proof that something more is going on, something unseen. They would call that specious and needlessly superstitious. I truly believe there is no way to prove it one way or another. We'll never be able to prove to anybody that our hope has evidence. There are hints, there are things that we could look at and go, it's got to be this. It points to it. But if there was a smoking gun, don't you think that everybody would believe at this point? Don't you think God would just come down and go, hey guys, it is true. But he doesn't. So we won't know until time ends for all of us. But that such superstition persists in such a new rational world is revealing to me. Which brings me back to Easter. The history of Jesus ultimately should have ended on Friday. He was a man that would have been considered a radical thinker by both ends of the Jewish culture. He had no support from Roman sympathizers. He had no support from Jewish guerrillas, no support amongst conservative Hebrew teachers, no support amongst the Jewish elite, no support from the Pharisees, no support from the Sadducees. And yet he had a popular following that worried everybody. At some points during his ministry, people tried to forcibly make him king. Sometimes the next day they would try to kill him. He was wildly misunderstood by his contemporaries. He was broadly beloved by the disenfranchised in society, though even they made no attempt to come to his rescue in his final days. He was brought before the Jewish court as a blasphemer and before the Roman authorities as a potential insurrectionist. No one knew what to do with him because there was no easy or truthful charge that they could easily bring against him. During his hearing, we see each leader trying to abdicate their responsibility of judgment against him. It is the mob that eventually decided to have him executed as a criminal. He was beaten and tortured in front of his family, in front of his friends. Ultimately, he died in one of the most brutal spectacles that any government has ever devised. And he was buried Friday evening in what has become known as the First Day, or Good Friday. I doubt his family or his friends slept on Friday night. The histories record that at the moment of his death, the weather turned ugly. There were earthquakes. There were reports of other supernatural and unexplainable occurrences as well. Something was not right in the world. Matthew 27:54 says this, when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, surely he was the Son of God. Again, Nietzsche and all of his fellow philosophers would mock the soldier, calling his superstitious fear foolish. Of course, Nietzsche was not there. I find it strange that the very minions that were gladly beating and killing Jesus stood aside in that moment and recanted, as if knowing they'd made a horrible mistake. Something was clearly wrong. There's no detailed record of what they did on Saturday. Luke only says that spices were prepared for Jesus' body to help preserve the corpse. In Christian traditions, it's sometimes known as Holy Saturday or Silent Saturday, because Jesus and God were silent that day. It was a Sabbath day for the Jews and a day of rest. And I imagine that for Jesus' family and friends, that was a very long and a very slow day. A day without work or activity by their own laws. Just a day to relive in terrible detail everything that had just happened the day before. This is the time in silence where doubt arises. This is when people question if they were fooled into believing something that's extraordinarily unlikely. I'm sure some of the disciples, some of his friends, some of his followers, none of whom were renowned or special before they began following Jesus, may have cursed themselves for being so foolish, as if saying to themselves, how could I have believed that the Messiah would have ever chosen me? Or how can I even go home now? I left everybody telling them that I was following the future king and the Messiah. If I go home, I will be a laughingstock for believing in everything Jesus said. Will the Romans or the Jewish authorities now come after me after they killed Jesus? You know, there is no Easter morning without a silent Saturday and all the doubts and questions that come with it. I found it difficult my whole life not to sometimes exist as though my life were a silent Saturday. All right? At 19, I became a Christian, and the entire trajectory of my life was altered completely. Like, I began going in a very different direction, an extraordinarily different direction, the moment I became a Christian, by my choice to believe in this unlikely message. I've sometimes sat awake late at night, wondering if I've given my life in vain to something that ultimately amounted to just a dead man in a tomb. I have been utterly suffocated by doubts. That, am I really known by God? Like, why would he know me? Why would he care? How could I really be loved and forgiven? That somehow, despite all the ugliness within me, God still sees me without blemish? Like, these are all doubts that well up within me at times. I have no excuse to fail, but I do, all the time. I have at my disposal the ability to be more generous, more gracious, more patient, more selfless, but way too often I am not. I am a humiliating collection of flaws, hypocrisies, and bad decisions, despite the fact that I know better, despite the fact that I'm a full-time minister. How is it possible that somebody with so much decaying virtue and compromised character could ever believe that a perfect God would give them the time of day? Now, this isn't self-pity, okay? I like myself quite a bit. I generally just think I'm fairly awesome, okay? So I don't walk around hating myself, but these are the meanderings of someone that tries to take stock of the world and my place in it. These are the thoughts and feelings of someone that cannot help but compare themselves to the person of Jesus and be left with this observation: I'm not worth it. And if God once thought I was worth it, if he once thought I was worth that sacrifice, he cannot still contend that I'm still worth it after all of this failure. I think many people live their lives on Silent Saturday, consumed by guilt and self-loathing, suffocated by doubt, afraid and insecure, looking at their own life and the world they inhabit and knowing with certainty that something is wrong. Yesterday would have been a very long and sad day. It's not good to live your life within Silent Saturday. Now, I bet for them the next day doesn't begin much better. They probably slept more Saturday night, but I bet when they woke up on Sunday, it wasn't much better. After a long, listless sleep, Sunday morning begins with dread, because some of them have to go to the tomb. It's a day to prepare a dead body, to see once more the fatal and brutal damage that was done to the man they once called teacher, and who in turn called them friend. At a time they thought they would be celebrating the coming of the King and the hopeful Messiah, they are instead burying a man who died with nothing. It is the cleanup of what should have been a victory party, but is now a vigil for the vanquished. It's a hard thing to hope and then lose. The women who stuck with Jesus through thick and thin were tasked with the work of preparing the body, the last remnant of the man that they loved, for its final rest. On the way to the tomb, it looks like they realized they had a dilemma in front of them. Because on the way there, they're asking one another, who's going to roll away the door? How are we going to get the tomb open? And maybe they wondered if the soldiers guarding the tomb would help them. Probably they thought they were going to have to go back to get some help from those lazy men who didn't come. So caught up in their grief and in this small dilemma, they'd maybe not noticed on the way there in the distance that the tomb stood open. perhaps in an attempt to avoid the sight of the tomb altogether until they had no option to look, they didn't see an angel sitting on the door. That's what I love. He's sitting on the door. There's not a lot of verbiage in the Bible about angels sitting. There's a lot of verbiage about angels terrifying, vanquishing armies all by themselves, standing in majesty, just unbelievable. I believe this is the first time the Bible mentions an angel sitting. And here's the thing, he doesn't need to sit. I don't think they get tired. I don't know why this matters to me, but I want to know why he's sitting. Personally, I just think it must look awesome. The tomb's open, and there's an angel nonchalantly sitting. When they finally did see the tomb open and the angel waiting for them, they're terrified. As Brittany alluded to, there is no encounter with an angel where there is not fear. But maybe they're terrified that he's there because someone stole the body. Maybe they're terrified to even think about hoping again. Terrified of judgment. The angel's there to judge us because of our failure. Terrified of the unknown. Terrified of not knowing what to do in this moment or what to say. It's this utterly human moment of being confronted by the unseen reality that surrounds us, to which we're normally blind to, and all of a sudden, it stands in front of us. An angel, a messenger, a harbinger of dread, a herald of change, standing before them, before an open door. And inside that door, they're trampled and beaten hopes. And the question that they have to answer, do you go through that open door? It's hard when you're disappointed to go through a door again. It's hard when you're beaten down. It's hard when things that you wished happened continue not to happen. It's hard when you're hurt. It's hard when you've been injured over and over again. It's hard to see an open door and say, I will go through it one more time. Matthew 28, verse 1 says this: After the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the tomb and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He's not here. He is risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you. So the women hurried away from the tomb, yet afraid, yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said, and they came up to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me. I like this scene for so many reasons. They go through this open door, and Jesus is not there. But they're told he's not dead. They're told he's risen. When they leave, after being commanded to go tell the disciples, Jesus briefly appears to them. But he does not go with them. He will not prove himself to his friends or his followers. The disciples will have to believe on the word of these great women. And Jesus does not really explain what's happening next either. It's a scary, joyful, and confusing time. Hope is rekindled. Questions remain unanswered. They simply have to trust Jesus. That, in a nutshell, to me, describes the life that we live. Hope, questions, trust. We get all of this hope of a life of a future, of a closeness, of a purpose, of a mission, of a reality that is true that we don't get to see but is there, of a God that loves us, of forgiveness, of grace. I mean, it's incredible. But then we have questions, and God will not answer them. I mean, not when we want them to be answered. Sometimes these questions are answered 20 years after we ask them. What is said is that you have to trust me. All the hope, all the joy, everything, you're going to have to trust me. And that's it. That's the life. Obey and trust. But he is alive. Somehow, beyond all hope, he lives again. On Easter morning, the entire order of the entire universe is turned on its head for the first time because death is no longer inevitable. It is defeated, and it's gasping in its own last throes. A plan hatched in the shadow of the garden when man and woman first succumbed to temptation and introduced sin into the world. That plan has now come to fruition. Of course, this isn't what we see through the news. This isn't what we see in our city. This isn't often what we see even in our own homes. Our own hearts may even deceive us in this. Something is wrong in the world. But that isn't the only truth or the only reality. Because by our faith, we do see Jesus standing by an open door, and he alive. And all the powers that plague our poor world know that their time is short because he's coming again to make all things new. Happy Easter. Let's pray for communion. Father, thank you so much for all the hope that you give us in this world. I don't know where I would be without this message and without this story and without the faith to believe it's true. We worship your Son today, God. Thank you so much for the life that he lived. And as we take the bread, we remember the type of life that he lived, the sacrifice that he made, the way that he loved people and spent time with people, was gracious with everyone, listened to people, and broke his body for people. And God, as we take the fruit of the vine, we remember the blood that he was willing to sacrifice for us. God, please help us to be those who would sacrifice for one another. Please help us to be those who would sacrifice for the hope of a stranger knowing you, God. We will live to follow his example. God, thank you for your Son and for all the hope that it brings us. Thank you for your love that you give to us through him. It's in his name that we pray this morning. Amen.